Hey there, and welcome to Undoing We, Divorce and Life Conversations on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, radio, podcast, and TV. I'm your host, Mardi Winder-Adams. I'm a divorce coach, a mediator, and someone who's been through exactly what you're going through. This show is all about helping you get through the tough stuff, the overwhelm of divorce, the what now moments, and the messiness of trying to rebuild your life. We're going to talk about real life challenges, share expert advice, and give you practical tools you can use to move forward with your life. Are you ready to start shifting from we to me? Grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Today, we're going to touch on a topic that I think applies to probably 70% or more of the clients that I see that are in the early stages of divorce, and that is deciding whether or not divorce is the right option. And there are situations where I'm sure we can all agree that divorce should be a priority. So these are situations where the relationship is unhealthy and unsafe. And specifically, I'm talking about situations where there is any kind of physical abuse, where there is coercive control, where there is emotional, financial, or spiritual abuse, whatever that may look like, or where one person is totally manipulating and controlling the other person. I don't like to use any diagnostic terms. I just like to call these high conflict or highly toxic relationships. So getting out of those, for most people, is complicated. And it is often intertwined with trauma bonds and not having resources and a lot of other very complex situations, even in very high asset relationships. But thankfully, most people are not going through those kind of divorces. And that in its own way can create a problem, although a different kind of problem. What do you do when you're just not happy in the relationship, but the other person is not a bad person? They're not aggressive or abusive or mean. They are maybe very kind and very considerate individuals, but you are no longer either in love with them or you're no longer getting what you need out of the relationship. And so when these situations come up, it tends to take people, particularly women, a lot of time to make the decision whether or not they should leave or they shouldn't leave the relationship. And I don't have any statistical information on this, but I can tell you anecdotally, in working with clients for many years in this process, decades even, I can say that, most of my clients talk about starting to think about how to get out of the relationship or whether the relationship is sustaining them and giving them what they need, probably about 18 months before they decide to actually make the decision to have the divorce conversation with their partner and then actually move out or move on with their life through whatever legal means they choose to dissolve their relationship. But the problem, I think, is that this is such an emotional decision because we have that vow that we took that we would stay with this person. For some people, that is a very strong connection and commitment. There are some people who don't believe in divorce, perhaps because, or their families and friends, maybe the people they associate with don't believe in divorce because of religious reasons or cultural reasons. There may be other people who just don't want to hurt the other person, or they feel that somehow going through the divorce may harm their children in some way. And so I think those are all big factors that can influence, do we make the decision to get out of the divorce, out of the marriage through divorce, or do we make the decision to in some way do a relationship intervention, whether that is going to counseling, whether that is really openly and transparently speaking to the other person about what you need in the relationship and making a decision as a couple as to whether or not you are willing to put in the time and effort. Because unfortunately, no matter how much you may see the relationship being salvageable, or that you can see if the other person could just make a few changes to their behavior and the way they're managing the relationship, you would be willing to make some changes. That can look great on paper or in your thoughts, but when it actually comes down to will that person make these changes, that becomes a much more difficult way to predict, or a much more difficult decision. Today, I've got just the expert to help you understand more effectively about how the brain works when making these decisions so that you can make an effective choice. Mike Fink is my guest. He's a clarity and decision-making expert, coach, and innovator. Mike has a Master of Science in Psychology from Yale, and he focuses his life now to help women get clarity when they are stuck in indecision and deciding whether or not they want to stay in a relationship or whether or not they want to get out. So he has created the decoding grid, which is a process for high stakes decision making that utilizes the brain's own way of processing information to really help create that clarity and picture of confidence moving forward. So let's listen in to Mike, and then let's talk a little bit about his process on the other side. I'm going to ask you a difficult question. What's the first sign that this indecision is weighing you down and is getting you stuck? Are there any things that people tell you are common symptoms?
Oh, absolutely, because indecision has a real cost. Our brain craves closure. And when it asks a question, should I stay or should I go, it looks for an answer. And when it cannot have that answer, it goes in overdrive mode. And this is exhausting. So I get to speak to a lot of women, even those like probably the ones you're working with, who maybe have either separated or already started the divorce process, but they're still second guessing themselves, right? And this constant second guessing, weighing the pros and cons and being unsure affects their mental focus, their emotions, their self-esteem, their ability to work, their relationship with others, their health, mental and physical, and their relationship with their kids.
Yeah.
And basically their life can be quite disrupted as a result. In fact, I even have a diagnostic tool for them to really understand that indecision has a real daily cost. And it's not just that they are in an unhappy relationship. The real problem they need to address is the indecision that is really weighing on their life and making things worse every single day.
I was reading a study, I think it was the University of Minnesota, if I'm not incorrect. They did a study on people going through divorce, and for 2 years around the time of the divorce, so preceding and after the divorce, they found that employees typically decrease productivity and decision-making ability at work by 40%. So wow. I want you to think about that. If you're an entrepreneur and you have to make those decisions, that's even increasing that cost of failure, right? Because not only are you dealing with all this emotional strain, but you could be making decisions that are not good for your business as well as your personal life.
Absolutely. I had clients who lose their job because they have gone down so much in performance that they weren't able to do it properly. So it becomes then a vicious spiral.
Right.
So let me jump into something very important because time is limited.
Yeah.
I have here, and I'm going to just describe what I have for your audio listeners, a brain mock-up. And the reality is that we don't have one brain, we have 3 brains. Now, this is important because people need to understand the real gatekeeper of the divorce decision. So at the bottom of the brain, you can imagine that the brain is composed like an ice cream cone with 3 layers of ice cream, one on top of the other. So the first layer is the primal brain, the reptilian brain, the lizard brain, the old brain. A lot of people have heard those terms. And this part of the brain was formed when there were dinosaurs around 500 million years ago. That's the first thing that we evolved with, and it is in charge of our survival. And this part of the brain is in charge of the fight or flight response, but also the freeze response. Now, this is really important because this is the part of the brain in charge of the divorce decision. Why? Because it cares for your survival. We are programmed to survive first. And it says, you know what? The divorce decision is such a high stakes, high cost of failure decision, because if you get it wrong, it will affect you, your kids, all areas of your life for the long term, that unless you're absolutely certain that it is the right decision, my job is to keep you safe. And you know what? When in doubt, wait it out. the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And that's why so many women, even smart, accomplished women, are stuck in indecision. Why? Because biology is stacked against them. We are wired for survival first and foremost. Happiness is kind of optional. So for a lot of people who are listening to this, if you're stuck in indecision, it's normal. You are just being subject to the status quo trap based on biology. So then we have a second part of our brain, that's the emotional brain. It evolved 200 million years ago. And then we have our most recent addition that came 2 to 3 million years ago, which is the rational brain, in charge of logic, of reasoning, and of language. So we just said that in order for you or for your brain to let you make a decision in terms of divorcing, and that's the one I'm going to talk most about given your specific audience, it needs to, your primal brain needs to be on board in terms of, okay, I get it. Even though divorce is challenging, it will be safer on the long term or even on the short term than staying in a bad relationship. But how do you convey this clarity and certainty to that part of your brain? Well, first, you need to have that clarity and certainty on a logical level, and then you need to convey to that part of your brain. The problem, though, is that this part of the brain evolved before the rational brain in charge of language. And that means, and pay attention, Marty, that your primal brain, the real gatekeeper of your decision, does not understand language. It does not understand words. And what do most traditional solutions have in common, whether it's marriage counseling, therapy, talking to friends, and so on? What do they have in common?
Talking. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, talking is important because you want to have logical clarity, but it's not enough to get all parts of your brain on board. Because otherwise, you might just be having a decision with your head. And I have a lot of clients who tell me my marriage counselor says I should divorce. And they may even agree with them logically, this but. And the but comes from that emotional resistance from the brain says, ho, 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 when in doubt, let it out.
Yeah.
Unless you give me clarity and certainty, I'm not going to go anywhere. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. And I love the idea of the ice cream cone. That's a really good visual, right? The top layer is not talking to the bottom layer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do we get this clarity and certainty first on a logical level, and then we'll talk about how to convey that to the primal brain. The first thing is, in order for you to make an assessment as to whether you can save your relationship or not, is to have all the pieces of the puzzle. If you are in the market to buy a car, unless you have absolute clarity in terms of what you're looking for, whether it's reliability, safety, gas economy, whatever that is, if you don't have clarity on those fronts, you will not be able to choose a car properly and determine whether it's a good option for you or not. It's the same thing with a relationship, except that instead of 5 or 6 things that people value in a car, most women, most people have between 20 to 30 things that they value in a relationship.
Sure.
And if that sounds like a lot to your listeners, it means that they are missing critical pieces of the puzzle. So you cannot solve a puzzle if you don't have all the pieces. Step number 1 is what I call value mapping, which is a process that I describe in my book, Divorce Decision Decoded, is gathering the pieces of the puzzle. But then that is not enough because not all values are created equal. And here is a thought experiment for you, Marty. Let's imagine that you're looking for your dream house and there are 20 things that are important to you. And one day a friend of yours comes and says, Marty, I have found your dream house. He has 19 out of 20 things. Is that a good thing or not?
For me, it would be an okay thing. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
You know, this is what 90% of people answer. Having said that, what if the one thing missing is location? The house is in a completely different city and state from where you want to live.
Sure, that would make a big difference. Yeah.
Everything else becomes a moot point, right? So this is why I say that values are not an equal vote democracy. They are a military hierarchy. It doesn't matter how many values are being fulfilled. What matters most is which ones are being fulfilled. So the next step in the process is what I call categorized ranking, where you go from really putting things in order. Once you know what values are important to you, you go to rank them from the most important one all the way down to the least important one. And then comes a critical distinction, which is understanding which values are essential for you, meaning non-negotiable, versus optional. And this is huge because otherwise people wonder, could I still save my marriage? And even marriage counseling can make things worse because if their spouse makes efforts but on things that are optional, now they have put time and effort, but they haven't done it on the real needle movers. And if you are thinking about pulling the trigger and divorcing, now you feel even worse potentially and more guilt.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And your spouse feels hostile because they made efforts, but they weren't recognized. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So that's a really good point. It makes the process not only worse because of your own guilt, but also because now they could be potentially more hostile.
Yeah.
So this is really important because I had this client, Tracy. She had a husband who was extremely messy, and something that was important to her was to have a tidy husband. And he would always drop the clothes on the floor, never put them in the laundry basket. He would leave the dirty dishes in the kitchen sink for 3 days. It would drive her nuts, and she would give him so much nagging, so much aggravation. She was focusing on that. But when we did the process, it turned out that she had 23 things that were important to her, and having a husband who was tidy not only was an optional value, but it was number 22 out of 23. And that was just a huge aha moment for her. She realized that she had focused time and effort on things that didn't matter. Now, the beauty of it was that she was able to also understand what things really matter, because she had focused on that simply because as human beings, we're not good at understanding our emotions, right?
Right.
And all the unhappiness that she felt, she just looked around and said, why am I unhappy? Oh, must be because of the mess. Right?
Exactly. It was so visible.
It was part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was only part of it. So then she was actually able to identify other areas in her relationship, in the essential part, that were not being fulfilled, to focus on those. And in her specific case, she was actually able to save the relationship and make it work. But
wonderful.
No, essential versus optional is key, because it enables you to understand, is this relationship salvageable or not? Because if there's too much that is not being fulfilled in the essentials area, it's not going to work. But if there's only a few things, you will know that it's salvageable, and you'll also know what to focus on, what the leverage points are. Does that make sense?
I love this. This is so insightful, and that values alignment is so critical. So I'm with you, Mike. So far, I'm right with you.
Perfect. So let's talk about the next step, which is once you have done those two steps, value mapping and categorized ranking, you see it kind of provides you logical clarity and certainty. The next step is, how do we convey that to the primal brain? And we said that the primal brain does not understand words. What does it understand then? It understands images. It is nonverbal. You know, it feels it when it sees it. This is why also when you watch a movie where you already know logically that it has a happy ending, like The Notebook. This is a movie that's popular with a lot of women, right? You know logically that Noah and Ali, they will end up together and have a beautiful love story. But during the first 2 hours of the movie, there's all the struggles, the challenges, the obstacles, and you go through those emotional, fears and struggles and anxiety. It's only at the end, when your primal brain sees it, when they're finally together, that it feels the happiness. So this is really important. Based on that, I have developed the third step, which is the relationship decoding. And basically, it is creating a visual language to communicate, where I basically take all the essential values and visually contrast them with the optional ones by putting them in a different color-coded area. So it's all in dark yellow, and they're all bold. So right away, when people look at the list, they have a sense, or their primal brain has a sense, okay, the thing I need to pay attention to is the dark yellow area, because those are the essential ones, because those are the values that need to be at least acceptably fulfilled for you to have sufficient happiness to stay in that relationship long-term. And the next step is to use, again, color coding and precondition association. So then we go one by one through each value, and each value we took the time to identify what it meant exactly, to know whether it was being fulfilled or not without a shred of a doubt. And then we color code it. If that value is being fully fulfilled, it becomes a green mark, a green dot with a check mark. What does green mean for the brain, Marty?
Go. Green means
absolutely.
Go.
It's preconditioned, right?
Yeah, we know that.
If the value is only acceptably fulfilled, it's blue, because blue is more of a neutral color. But if a value is not fulfilled, or even if the opposite is present, then it's a red dot with a cross. And what does red mean for the brain?
It means stop.
Stop, no go, bad, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, people can see and have an assessment of their entire relationship in a color-coded way that makes immediate sense to their primal brain, and that enables them to consider all the variables all at once, because they can immediately see, is my essential area more in the green area, in the blue area, or in the red area? And it's remarkable because when I show those case studies to people that I talk to on the phone, they are able to, I ask them, do you think that this relationship can be saved or not? And within seconds, they say no. I say, yeah. And what makes you say that? And they immediately see, there's too much red in this. And it's mostly about, the most important values. So I had the story from Kate. She had been confused for 5 years whether to divorce or not because her husband was a good guy. And by the way, a lot of women told me, I wish my husband was a jerk. Why?
Because it's easier.
Quote unquote jerk.
Yeah.
The primal brain in charge of their protection would say, okay, I get it. It's better to move on. But when your husband is not a monster, that's when you're stuck in the status quo. So it came that he fulfilled 70% of her values, which is not bad, quote unquote, but we saw that it doesn't matter how many values are being fulfilled, but which ones. And when we did the assessment, it turned out that out of 17 values, she had 7 in the essential areas, 17 essential values that were not being fulfilled. And most importantly, 4 out of the top 5 were not being fulfilled.
Right.
So she saw, you know what? Yeah, he has a lot of good things going for him, but not in the right areas. Right. And finally, she had clarity that her relationship could not be saved. And that's when she was able to move forward with divorce with peace of mind, being able to know what she wanted to do, why she wanted to do it, being able to explain to her spouse and to her kids while looking them in the eye why it was the right decision with peace of mind. And to make a decision without any fear of regret. She just knew it was the right thing to do regardless of the ultimate outcome. I
don't know about you, but I just loved that conversation. And I think that in particular, what I like is how much talks about how the different parts of the brain actually process information very differently, and how when we are able to create a way for that old part of our brain, the limbic system, that's in that keeps us in that fight or flight situation, and our thinking part of our brain, when we're able to get those parts of our brains aligned and understanding the choices we're making, we don't have that indecision. We're not stuck in that, should I stay or should I go? We're not stuck in, oh, but if I make this decision, I'm being selfish, or I'm a bad person, or, I'm not thinking enough about the other person. This decision-making process is so critical. And I think getting it right is worth the time and the effort and the energy it takes to really make sure that you are making this complete decision effectively and correctly for you and for whatever else you may be considering, whether you've got children or whether or not you're just really concerned about the impact of the decision on the other partner. There are ways to go through divorce. We know this. We see couples who do have a good divorce process. And I think if you go into the divorce with clear understanding of why you're making the decisions, and that you're not acting in anger or revenge or hostility or resentment of the other person, that you can still create a positive relationship moving forward, whether that's a co-parenting relationship, looking after your kids together, or whether it is as two newly single people who are able to maintain some level of friendship or association. And not everybody wants to do that. I get it. Sometimes exes are exes for a reason. And sometimes people, go through the divorce process and they realize that maybe they were just better friends than they ever were getting into the relationship part of whatever their interaction was. So I think these are all important topics and ideas and processes to consider. But I do think that when you get this decision making right, when you are really clear on why you are asking for the divorce, you are able to articulate that. You're able to avoid that a lot of the guilt and the shame and the second guessing that comes along with divorce. And quite frankly, I think it sets you up for being more comfortable being a single moving forward, because you're not doing that inner critic thing in your head. Well, I should have worked harder, or he wasn't that, or she wasn't that bad of a partner. I could have tried to make this work a little bit more. Now, One of the nice things I like about Mike's process is, as you can hear when he's talking about color coding and identifying values and really getting in that alignment, this doesn't have to be a lengthy process. He takes most people through it in 30 days. You could do it on a self-study or you can do it with him. There's lots of options to manage this process. But I think the fact that you go through it really is bringing that clarity. The other thing that I want to stress too is that when you feel that you are making a good decision, you are going to be less emotionally reactive in the process because you're very clear on your why and you're very clear on your reasons. Because unfortunately, I'm just going to throw this in here as a parting thought. A lot of times when you are divorcing a nice person, in other words, they're a decent human being. They're a good person. They've never done any of those really horrible things that are done in some relationships. You can get a lot of pressure from friends and family that you should try to make the relationship work. If you know in your heart, if your values and your sense of who you are and what you want to do and what you want out of a relationship are not in alignment with your current partner and relationship, then you can move through the process and not let those other voices kind of sway you and pull you back into a situation that just simply is not going to be sustainable for you in the long term. I hope this has helped you get some ideas around decision-making and divorce. And I really encourage you that if you are stuck in not knowing what to do, reach out to Mike. He's a fantastic resource. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself.